All right, welcome everyone. We are holding by Book of Leviticus Chapter 16 again. Holding by Book of Leviticus Chapter 16. We're in verse 4, and we spoke last week about the purpose of the vestments, of the clothing of the high priest. So the Torah says. Again, in verse 4, it says, Ketonas bad, Kodesh Yobash, Mignasei bad, Yual Besaroi, Avneit bad, Yachor, Minsnefes, bad Yitznoi, Big the Kodeshem, Berachat, Maim is Besaro Avation. So Torah says he's going to wear Kohen Gadol, and again, it's all a prelude to basically speaking about Yom Kippur and how he's going to serve. I was going to serve on Yom Kippur. So the Torah says, Shadon sacred linen, it's ketonis linen, Miklasayim will wear these pants, shall be upon his flesh, shall gird himself with the linen avnei, to cover his head with the linen mitznefes, and these are sacred garments, shall immerse his flesh in the water, and then he'll wear them. Right? So we mentioned that he's not allowed to go in the Holy of Holies with golden clothes, right? There are 8 vestments. 8 vestments altogether. 4 are of linen, 4 are of gold. We already know that before. We mentioned last week, right? We already know that before, that there are other gold vestments. Torah doesn't have to mention me again. But there's a reason why you're not allowed, Kohen Gadol, the high priest, not allowed to wear them. Not allowed to wear them in the temple. Again, what does gold represent? Gold represents sin of the golden calf. So there's a Talmudic dictum, and kategor nases and negor, meaning the defendant cannot now, or the accuser cannot be the defendant. Right? Aaron Cohen is coming to atone for himself, for his house, for the Jewish people. So there's some level of sin, some very small level, wasn't even, by accident, even less than that. Whatever it was, how can he bring a sacrifice in the Holy of Holies of gold, right? What does gold represent over here? Gold represents the golden calf, right? So we spoke about that. And we spoke about the vestments, what they represent, right? We spoke the Kuyaka, we spoke about that quite a bit, about what all these different vestments represent. So we spoke all about that. And now I want to see this Rabbeinu Bachai. Now the Rabbeinu Bachai on this verse, he says, first of all, it mentions 4 clothing, right? 4 vestments over here made of linen, right? He brings down a medrash, right? He brings down a medrash over here, and the medrash says that the linen is coming to exclude the breastplate. The linen is coming to exclude the aphods, coming to exclude the coat, coming to exclude the tzitz, the thing he wears on his head, right? Coming to exclude all of them. What's the reason? What's the reason that we mentioned before? The vestments of the Kohen Gadol were 8. There were 8 vestments, 8 types of clothing, right over here. 4 of linen, 4 of gold. They wasn't allowed to go in the Holy of Holies with his golden garments. Why not? Just like we mentioned, the accused cannot now be the defendant. Right? He's not allowed to. Right? He's not allowed to over here. Why? Because again, at some level, there was something that Aaron did that was wrong. Some very small level, right? It's hard to really understand what it was, but you're not allowed to wear these vestments. Totally not allowed to over here. Why? Looks bad. You gotta remember the sin of the golden calf. So instead, you'll go in the Holy of Holies with linen. You're not allowed to wear gold over here, right? You can wear gold for other things, and maybe for other sacrifices, not this. Because not all sacrifices went in the Holy of Holies. Only went in the Holy of Holies. How many times a year? Once. Right? Once, and that was on Yom Kippur. So we understand, we saw before, we spoke quite a bit about the sin of his two sons, Nadav and Avihu. Right? Problem is the number of issues, what they possibly could have done, what the sin was. Right? You can tell me they drank before they, gave sacrifice. You can tell me, they brought a strange fire, when they weren't supposed to. So it was an auspicious time. The tabernacle gets put up. And when the tabernacle gets put up, they said, it's such an unbelievable spiritual time. They said, let's jump in the Holy of Holies. Right? They bring the strange fire. They jump in, they die. Right? Also, very hard to understand. Simple explanation. Well, not so simple, but simple explanation would be they went in when they weren't supposed to. They were doing it l'shem shamayim. They were doing it for the sake of heaven. They're on an extremely high spiritual level. But God said, I don't want you to do this. You're not allowed to go in whenever you want. Right? So since over here, there's some semblance of a remembrance of the sin of the golden calf, can't wear gold. Forbidden to wear gold over here. And that's why the Torah here says, right? Interesting, if you look at the verse, it says Ketonas Bat. Right? Mikna say Bat. Right? These pants that were made of linen. The Ketonas of linen. Avnei Bat, the belts made of linen. Mitznefes Bat. Why does it keep saying Bat? Just tell me all four. Why do you have to keep repeating the fact that it says linen? I don't need you tell me once. I don't need to tell me every time. Right? So here, Rabbeinu Bachai says it's coming to exclude these other four vestments because you're not allowed to wear them. Right? If we were Karaites, put on my Karaite hat over here. Karaites will love this. So how do they explain this verse? The Torah does not repeat things for no reason. Never. Right? It has to have a purpose. So over here, what can I say? You'll say, well, maybe it's emphasis. Okay, maybe. Well, why are you telling me all these things are of linen? All you need to do is tell me one. You can just tell me they're all made of linen. Why do you have to mention linen 4 times? Right? So the Rebbeinu Bachai says from the Medrash, why do you mention it 4 times? To exclude all these other vestments made out of gold. Otherwise, I wouldn't have known. Torah doesn't have to tell me that. Torah could have been very easy. Just mention all these are made of bad, of linen. Don't tell me this is a bad, that's bad, that's bad. This is made of linen, that's made of linen. The other thing's made of linen. Who cares? Why you keep repeating the same thing? I already understood that. It's because of Rebbeinu Bachai telling you, no. There is a reason. The reason is because you can't go in with gold. Gold's going to make them look bad. Right? God's going to remember the sin of the golden calf. But whatever level the sin was, you can't go in with those vestments. Again, if I was a Karaite, I don't believe in oral law, what am I going to answer? Got a problem. Right? I'm sure they'll have their own answer, whatever it is. But essentially, you got an issue here. Right? You totally have an issue here. You get repetition for seemingly no reason. So here the Rebbeinu Bachai gives you an answer. So it says, therefore, mentions each time bad, it mentions linen in order that it's going to include the other one. Right? It's going to include the other ones, even though he couldn't bring them. He couldn't wear them. Why? Because in each of these verses, in each of these vestments, the Rebbeinu Bachai says of each vestment that the Kohen Gadol wore, right, there are different verses to say. Each one he said with Hashem. Right? The Torah says before God. By the Choshen, by the breastplate. Right? It says in Exodus chapter 28, verse 29, it says, Lifnei Hashem Tamid. When he's going to wear it, he's going to wear it in front of God always. By the ephod, same thing. Right? It says, Lifnei Hashem, before God, Exodus chapter 28, verse 12. Then it says, by the code, but boy, Kodesh Lifnei Hashem, you're going to come to the holies before God. That's Exodus 28, verse 35. Then it says, by the tzitz, it says, L'ratzon lehem Lifnei Hashem. Right? It's going to be chapter 28, verse 38. Then it says, for God's will, he's going to do it before God. Right? So then you're going to tell me, says Rabbeinu Bachaya, I might have thought he could enter the Holy of Holies with these vestments. Oh, I can't do that. That's why it says bad, it says linen, coming to exclude the choshen. Linen coming to exclude the ephod. Right? Coming to exclude the coats and the tzitz as well. So Lifnei Hashem, what does that mean? Interesting enough. Right? We'll throw this out there as well. What does it mean over here? So before God can have a number of definitions. It could be just in the temple itself. Right? Maybe it means the courtyard. Maybe before God only means the Holy of Holies. But see, again, I need definitions over here. Just like, this week's parsha we're going to read. We're going to read here in Israel, Parshas Emor. And this week, outside of Israel, read Parshas Kedoshim. So we're going to be a week behind for the next 14 weeks because second day of Passover was festival outside of Israel. Here was a regular Shabbos. So they're going to be a week behind. But in either case, in Parshas Emor, in this week's parsha, we're going to read here in Israel, what's going on? A lot of it speaks about the holidays. Now, why do I mention it speaks about the holidays? Because when it speaks about Sukkot, you're going to sit in a booth for 7 days, right? Can't do any work. And then it says, okay, we don't have a definition of what a booth is, what a sukkah is. Does it have walls? Does it have a roof? Then it says you're going to take palm fronds. It's going to take a nice smelling fruit. No one in the right mind is going to think it's a lemon on steroids, right? An esrog with willows. And you're going to take hadassah. You're going to take myrtle leaves. And it says you're going to bring these in front of God. Very good. In front of God, where? You're going to say in the temple. Great. Where? Specific place. Right? We have no definition. Right? How big is an esrog? How big is a lulav? Is there anything that nullifies? You can't use it. What happens? It gets dried up. Right? What happens if the top gets cut off? Right? A lot of things. A lot of things here the Torah tells me this is what you got an obligation to do. Doesn't tell me how to do it. I have no possible way to know how to do it. Right? So now someone's going to say, well, how do we know? How do we know what to do? Well, we have an oral law. And oral law is going to tell me what to do. Right? So why do I mention that? Because here it says, Lifnei Hashem. It says many times, before God. Very good. Where? When? Right? Well, specifically where? Maybe I think, so there's Rabbeinu Bachaya. Maybe it's talking about the Holy of Holies. Maybe before God means in the Holy of Holies. Right? But why would I not say that? Because we've been speaking the last number of weeks. You can't go into the Holy of Holies whenever you want. Right? So maybe it only means once, doesn't mean all these other times. Maybe. So that's why it says linen. That's why it says linen over here. In order to tell you where it goes. Because gold's going to smack and smell like sin of the golden calf. And then the Rebbeinu Bachai says, these are holy vestments. Now the question was, right, what did the Torah say? The Torah said at the end of this verse, they are sacred garments. And then he's going to immerse his flesh in the water and then wear them. Now the question is, what does it mean they're sacred? Aren't all the garments sacred? Maybe all the garments are sacred. Can you use non-sacred garments in the temple? Right? Let's throw that out there. No. They have to be sacred, but what does it mean it has to be sacred? So here it means it has to be sanctified to the temple before the Kohen Gadol puts them on. before the high priest puts them on. In other words, it had to be given over to the temple to be used specifically for that. Otherwise, if it's not sanctified, right? If it's not sacred over here, you can't wear them. And another thing we just mentioned, let's say something was sanctified to the temple. Someone gave whatever, to the temple, and then it got misused. In other words, let's say someone gave, I don't know, a chair, a table, something, it says this is going to be sanctified to the temple. All right, that's what the person says. Now, once the person made that statement and says, yeah, I'm going to give this, they are going to give it to the temple. What's the problem? No problem. If they give it to the temple, it's used for sacred things. Very good. But what if he sat on the chair himself? What if he used the chair for something else or the table for something else? So that's a total prohibition of what we call me'ilah. Me'ilah means you took something that was consecrated, you took something that was sacred to the temple, you misused it. Use the table to eat on. I don't know, use the table to dance on, who knows what. But you didn't use it for sacred purpose. That you're not allowed to do. Once you sanctify, you got to be careful what you say, right? Once you sanctify, it's sanctified. Can't just use it for what I want. It has to be used for temple usage. If it's taken out of that usage, you used it for something else. That's a Torah prohibition. That's what we call me'ilah, right? At some point, we're going to speak about it, right? More in depth. But that, in short, that's what it is. That is what me'ilah is. You're not allowed to misappropriate sacred things given to the temple. Yeah. So what do we learn now? When the Kohen Gadol goes he goes into the Holy of Holies. He goes in the Holy of Holies. Now it's a little bit deep here, but we'll see how we're going to explain this. He says, and he's not even talking Kabbalah here, right? He says when the Kohen Gadol goes into the Holy of Holies, the high priest goes in, right? What do we have? We have the temple in this world. Now, obviously, the temple's been destroyed. The only part of the temple we have left is the outer wall, what we call the Western Wall, or what they call the Wailing Wall. That's what we have left, right? So it says to Rabbeinu B'chaye like this. He says, when the Kohen Gadol goes in, the high priest goes in to the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, and he goes into the temple Shalmata. What's the temple Shalmata? The temple in this world. They're going to say, what? There's a temple up in heaven? Oh, right? So he says, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, is going to go in. He's going to go into the Holy of Holies in this world, right? Because there's a temple in this world. And he says that is comparable to the service that's done in the temple above, in the temple of heaven. Mind-boggling idea. There are things in this world correspond to it in heaven. Now, what exactly does the temple look like and what's going on there? Okay, the whole discussion. But he says there's a correspondence. There's a correspondence between the temple in this world and the temple in the next world, in the spiritual world. And so it says Rabbeinu B'chaye, just like he's going to serve over here, the high priest is going to serve in this world and the temple with 4 vestments made out of what? Made out of linen. Which is comparable to the 4 camps. That serve God above in the south, where you have certain angels that have 4 wings and 4 faces and all that. So, what's the point? What's the point? He says that I just want you to know that what goes on in this world is comparable to the next one. What goes on in the spiritual world. You got angels serving. Because remember, when the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, He's pretty much, his body is nullified, and he's pretty much like an angel at that point. Now the question is, if he's got the proper intention and all that, it'll come out okay. If not, the angel's there, the fire there is going to, because it's going to be comparable, we're going to see to Gan Eden, to paradise. And once Adam and Eve ate from the tree, what did God do? He put fiery angels next to the tree of knowledge. Sorry, to the tree of life. Why did God do that? Why are there these fiery angels there? To make sure no one would eat from the tree of life. Why not? Because if you eat from the tree of life, bang, I'm going to live forever, right? I'm going to live forever. Can't live forever. Because now there's a decree. Adam and Eve ate from the tree of knowledge. What did it do? It brought death to the world. Death, not a Jewish concept. Never been a Jewish concept. Problem is, God had to go to plan B. He had to go to plan B. And he knew this could happen. Certainly foresaw it was going to happen. So, okay. So, man goes down very much in level. And now God says, you know what? This is what you did. I'm bringing death to the world. There's going to be such a thing as death. Now, at this point, that decree has been made. But still, Adam and Eve are not out of the garden yet. If they're not out of the garden, what happens? They could say, wow, God didn't say don't eat from the tree of life. Never said that. All God said was don't eat from the tree. That's in the middle of the garden. This tree of knowledge, right? Tree of knowledge between good and evil. Do not eat from that tree. So what do I understand? Every other tree you can eat from. You can eat from any other tree, not a problem. Okay. Right now, that's not a problem. Then I now have an issue. The issue is God makes a decree and said, okay, now there's death. Now, since there's death, and death is an atonement, right? It doesn't atone for everything, but it atones, right? At some level of atonement. Now, that being the case, even if it has a level of atonement, what does God say? Now they ate from the tree of knowledge. You came from the dust, you're going to go back to the dust. So you have to go in the ground, you have to die, you have to be buried. Now, if he ate from the tree of life at that point, even if death is decreed, and he eats from the tree of knowledge, gets the tree of life, he's not going to die. If he doesn't die, he's not going to get atonement. That's going to be a problem, no matter what he does. He's not going to get full atonement. Why? Because we mentioned, different things that Yom Kippur atones for. Yom Kippur in general is an atonement. You have to do something, right? Someone mentioned, it was on Tanakh Talk, where I spoke about, knowing the thoughts of other people, Reform and conservative Jews, etc. Right? I mentioned, a number of things that, what they believe, what they don't believe, and all that. And the point was, you can't just do what you want. And the person can't say, well, whatever happens, God will understand, and when I die, it should be, they're not saying this, right? But some people say, well, it'll be an atonement. So you have to believe it'll be an atonement. If a person dies, and, right before they die, they don't acknowledge where they're going or what's going to be, who says they get atonement? Who says they get any level of atonement? Right? And if someone, I'll give you an example. If someone is suffering, they are suffering like no tomorrow in this world. They're suffering from sickness. They're in a tremendous amount of pain. If they acknowledge that this pain is an atonement for sins that they've done, they get atonement. But if they complain, and say, I just want to die, give me a casket, whatever, just put me in the ground, I can't take the pain anymore, and all that. That doesn't, just because they die, they don't get atonement for suffering. For some people, when they suffer, that suffering can take them to the next world. That could be their Olam Haba right now. Right? I'll give another example. heard a story of a doctor, heard it from his mouth, so people can't say, oh, you didn't hear it. It wasn't firsthand. Told the story on the radio. Right? Told the story how he became religious. What happened? So he wasn't religious, at one point, whenever. And he had a patient that was on a respirator. And the family, got together and they decided, nothing good's going to come out of this. Even if he does come out of it or she comes out of it, the person's going to be a vegetable. The person's going to be a vegetable, and that's not, that's not real life. So they said, what, pull the plug. Pull the plug. Because it's really only being kept alive artificially. So there are times, again, we're not going to go into it, but there are times when it would be permissible to pull the plug. Obviously, you need someone great to tell you when that is. But in general, if a person's on a respirator and you're not allowed to pull the plug, that's murder. 100% that's murder. Nothing to talk about. So for us, doesn't matter. You pull the plug, you shoot him in the head, same thing. Murder. So what happens? So he pulled the plug. And obviously what happened? Person died. Now, story gets better. Or scarier in that sense. Right? What happened? The soul of this person that died came to the doctor in a dream. Now, we should never, ever have dreams like this. Even though we say dreams don't mean anything, right? 99.9% of dreams, could have been something bad you ate, could have been, just a manifestation of things you thought of during the day, during the week, whatever it was. But 99% don't mean anything. Now, if a person's really bothered by a dream that they have, they can go in front of 3 people and try and nullify it. Right? Nullify. It's called Hatavas Halom. In order to nullify it, because they're bothered by this dream. Right? What happened? The soul comes to this doctor in the dream. This is the doctor telling the story. Right? So the doctor says, the soul comes to him, and he says, you're a murderer. You killed me. I was sitting there. I could have, I was going to be there for another few days, few weeks, whatever it was. That was my atonement in this world. I got that was the suffering. That was my Olam Haba. You killed me. You murdered me. And now I'm suffering in Gehenna. Now I'm suffering in hell. This guy woke up. The doctor woke up in a fright. In an absolute fright. He sort of blew it off, whatever. He said, dreams don't mean so much, whatever. Blew it off. The next night, the soul comes back to him. You murderer! You killed me! Look what happened over here. I'm now suffering. That was my atonement. Now, he was in a coma. The guy was, being kept alive, artificially. Again, when it's forbidden to take him off. So he said that was his Olam Haba. He was suffering. We have no idea what goes on. Person's unconscious. We have no idea what they see, what they hear, anything. We just think they're lying there. They don't hear anything or see anything. Tell a story about that in a second. So what happens? So his soul tells him, you cut me off. That was atonement for me. That was suffering I had to go through. In all that suffering, guess what? I could have had a much greater portion of Olam Haba. I wouldn't have had to suffer in the next world. And now I'm going through all the suffering, and it's your fault. Imagine having a dream like that. Twice. I don't think he came back after. I think that was it. I think he came back twice, if I remember the story right. That's a significant dream. That's not a dream you can just blow off. Right? If the person has the same dream a bunch of times, something this significant, you can't just say, oh, he ate something bad. He had indigestion or whatever. Can't say that. They're pretty significant. Point is that we have no idea. Someone's in a coma, whatever. We don't know what's going on. And for that person, that was their Olam Haba. That was their portion of the next world. That suffering was atoning for all the stuff they did in this world. All the negative things. All the transgressions. But he cut it short. Because, okay, the kids, the family said, pull the plug. So he pulled the plug. We understand what's going on. Person just sitting here with no idea. Tell another story. While I'm on this topic. There's a story of someone in the mid-20s. I think they were in the mid-20s. Got in a horrible car accident. And basically were unconscious for, I don't know, months. And he ended up coming back to his body, but what story did he tell? The story he told was he was there the whole time. His spirit was there. He could hear everything. Every last thing he could hear. So imagine the soul knows what's going on. And now what does the soul hear? Sorry, what does the soul see over here? The soul sees that they're having this whole discussion. And they're discussing what to do with him. They're discussing, well, is he ever going to come out of it? If he does come out of it, it's going to be brain damage, going to be this, going to be that. Maybe we should just pull the plug. Now imagine the person's a soul. He hears and he sees everything going on. No one sees him, right? He's invisible, so to speak, but he's in a coma. And he's screaming at the top of his lungs, whatever that means as a soul. He's screaming left and right, don't kill me, don't murder me. You're going to murder me, don't do it. Nobody could hear him. Nobody could hear him. And months later, they didn't kill him, thank God. They didn't kill him, he came out of it. His soul came back to his body, he came out of it. There goes the rehabilitation, other things, right? But essentially, he came out of it. So, doctors, quote unquote, decide what is quality of life. And there are stories of people had, have cancer, the body's very weak, and they're trying to convince them to die. Don't do any heroics. You're terminal anyway. Why be a burden over here? Like just go to hospice and die. Like, there's some doctors have unbelievable bedside manner, right? But they're convinced that that's what's best for them. They're taking up a space. Someone who's healthier could actually get better, potentially get better. So the story of a woman whose mother was in such a situation. I read the story. And other doctors said, listen, if you don't get her out of that place, they're going to kill her, right? Or you're going to die there either way, however it's going to be. So she got clearance, got her out. She lived another 10 years. Normal life. She got better, and, she walked out of the hospital like miraculously. And, they thought, okay, let's not feed her so much. Let's not do this. Let's not do that. So what's going to happen? The body's going to get weaker and weaker. Someone who's cancer, when they put them in hospice, what do they end up dying of? What secondary cause of cancer? Pneumonia. They die of pneumonia because they can't fight it off. Now, in hospice, they have an obligation to feed the patient. They have an obligation to give them liquids. But obviously, they're not gonna starve them. They starve them, right? That they're liable over here, right? That's murder. But if they give them, and the doctor once told me this, that they give them enough to survive, enough to live. What does that mean? It means that they're given barely enough to live, but that's not murder. And the body still gets weaker. And if the body gets an infection, that infection probably will kill them. And that's what cancer patients normally die of. They die of normally of pneumonia. Not going to say all of them, but a lot. The secondary cause. So there's very fine lines. I want to ask the question, well, was that murder? It's not murder. Why not? Murder has to be direct. Has to be direct. If it's something where they starve them, that's more direct. So the Talmud goes through a whole bunch of cases. I'll just throw this out there also, just to show. Some people say, it says don't murder. So that's pretty simple. Okay, let me give you some scenarios. Let's say someone tied someone up to a chair. They can't move. They tie him outside to a chair. Now, guess what? At that time, it's 7 o'clock in the morning. 7 o'clock in the morning. So, sun's out, not very strong. Within the next 2 to 3 hours, it's going to be 110 degrees Fahrenheit, right? About 42 Celsius. What's going to happen? The person's going to sweat, dehydrate, and die. Now, is that murder? Person can't get out. Person's stuck. Now, it's only murder, according to some commentaries, if the sun was already out and it's very strong. Could have been 90 degrees. Doesn't matter. It's enough to kill a person if they're out there long enough. So if they're out there long enough and the sun's there, that's murder. But if the sun wasn't there, right? So who says that's murder? It's going to happen, right? That's the whole question. If it's going to happen in the future, but it's not happening right now, who says that's murder? So give another case. Someone ties someone up. No one should do this, obviously. You tie someone up on a train track. Tie someone up on a train track. Train's not coming. But you know in 10 minutes, train's going to come. Now what happens? No one's around. Train's going to come. Not going to see the person splat. The train's going to kill the person. Now, the train's not here right now. Same case as before. If the train's not here, but you know it's going to come, is that murder or not? Right? There's a whole question. Again, not going to answer it on one foot here. It's complicated. Right? Some are going to say, since I know the train's going to come anyway, that's murder. Doesn't matter if it's here or not. Others are going to say the train has to be already on the way. You already have to be able to see it in the distance. If you see it in the distance, you know it's coming. That's one thing. If it's already 10 minutes away, it's not the same thing. Others will say, as long as I know it's coming, right? Something like that, you know it's going to come. Whether it comes in 5 minutes, comes in 10 minutes, no matter, it gets delayed a little bit, it's going to come. Right? The question is, if it's going to come, is that murder? Or does it have to already be coming? I have to see it. Right? Does it already have to be in the world right now, right in front of me? If not, maybe that's not murder. So there's a whole discussion. Torah's complicated. We've never been in such situations. But at the same time, a person has to realize, life is precious. If someone does something to themselves, a different issue, right? That's also, it's direct, right? Mr. Kevorkian, right? Mr. Dr. Death, right? He injects something, the person dies, that's death. That's murder, right? That's direct. Doesn't matter if he's a Jew or a non-Jew. Everyone will agree that's murder. Question would be, what if the person himself, now they have these machines, right? What if the person pushes a button, doesn't go in direct? This happens, that happens, then eventually it goes in. That's direct, right? Sorry, that might be indirect. Or let's say, you got a very strong river, you got it blocked. And what do? You hold somebody there, you undo this dike, and he drowns. Right? That could be direct. A lot of different scenarios. That's, different ways people to die. I don't have to, go through all this. But the point is, there are totally different ways here. And therefore, some things will be considered causative. If it's causative, it doesn't mean it's direct. If it's direct, if it's considered direct, that's another thing. There's a case, Talmud brings out, a person shoots an arrow, and the wind takes it and ends up killing someone. What can a person say? I didn't do that. The wind took it. But whose action is it? If it's really your action, the wind took it, your action. Or do we say, no, he started it, but the wind finished it? It gets a little bit complicated here, right? Exactly what the case is. But okay, I digress here, a drop. I want to point out that there's a lot more going on than what we see. And we see that all the time in the world. There are a lot of things we don't understand at all. Zero. We don't understand. We see things, righteous people have it hard. Evil people seem to have it easy. Age-old question. And a lot of things we don't fathom. And in 10 lifetimes, we're never going to fathom. We don't know how God works. In this world today, we don't have a temple. God's ways are hidden within hiddenness. Very hard to make heads or tails out of anything. Very, very difficult. People spin it this way, spin it that way. It could be this, it could be that, it could be the other thing. At the end of the day, God's pulling the strings. That's what he's doing. He's the one pulling the strings. Why is it sometimes like, what's going on now, with Russia and Ukraine? Why now? I have no idea. Right? But what are we told? The hearts of kings are in the hands of God. What does that mean? They make decisions. They think, oh, I'm making this decision and I'm doing this. God's just pulling the strings to get what he wants. We don't see the repercussions so much later. All of a sudden, Mr. Putin, decides he's going to go in, Ukraine ticked them off enough. Okay, going to go in. Why now? Well, what happened before? Before it wasn't so good, before this, before that. So all the pundits can come up and say all their Torah. Why? And what's the reason according to the Torah? Because God didn't want to do it yet. God has a plan. What's the problem? We're not privy to the plan. We don't know what the end result's going to be. Could it be the end of the world? Could be. People are talking about that because they got nuclear weapons. This is happening in Africa. Nobody would care. Right? Certainly nobody would care. Third world countries, who cares? Nothing's going to happen. In the bigger scheme of things. Right? Here, you got major world power. Major world power. Things that get worse. They could not. They could stop. Who knows? Could it be the beginning of the end? In theory, depends how far it goes. Nobody knows. People, making predictions, but nobody knows. So so the question is, okay, why now? We can ask that, all throughout history. Why does this happen like this? Why does this happen like that? And on how wars started and different things. But you know what? A lot of things go on behind the scenes that, you don't necessarily pay attention to too much later. Right? You look at how Germany became a world power. What was Germany? A bunch of feudal states. Otto von Bismarck, in the 1850s, put them all together, put them into like one unit, which the Gemara says, interesting. If that would be the case, this place called Gramamia, the Gemara Megillah says. Place called Gramamia, it sounds like Germany, right? Right? If you take all these places, you put them together, they'll destroy the world. It's what the Gemara says 2,000 years ago. Going to destroy the world. Right now, it's a bunch of feudal states. You can Google this, you can check it out. It's a bunch of feudal states. They're going to have any power? They're going to have world power? Zero. They're not going to have much power. But he was a statesman par excellence, Mr. von Bismarck. So what did he do? He got them all together. What happened when he got them all together? Created an empire. Created an empire over here. Tremendous empire. And you have all these dukes and whatever, conglomerating power. Tremendous thing. So what does the Gemara say? You allow that to happen, or if that happens, they can come out and destroy the world. Well, who came out of Germany? We know what happened. And that's what he would have done. He would try and take over the whole world. Until he finally got stopped. Well, that was the goal. And then, but it didn't happen all at once. Didn't just happen in 1933. It started well before. Well before in 1800. Right? And you got World War One. They came out as a power. And then, got to World War Two. We know what happened. But again, would people, way back and said, if this happens, they're going to see the future? Of course not. They had no idea. But that's the end result. So now you're looking back at history, right? It's Monday morning quarterback. Monday morning quarterback. So now you can look back and say, look what happened over there. Let's connect the dots. So when you see, it's kind of like reading the Purim story. Read the book of Esther, you see a bunch of events, seemingly insignificant events. But every event, everything that happens, each thing you needed in order for Haman to get killed. But if you look at each individual thing, you're going to say it doesn't sound so significant. Right? Give one example. Mordechai tells Esther the plan of this big son and Seresh. They want to kill the king. Right? So he tells Esther, he gets the word to Esther. Esther gets the word to Achashverosh. Achashverosh verifies it and kills them. So what does he do? He writes in the Book of Chronicles. Right? The most boring book ever created. 9 o'clock, the king got up. 9:15, he did this. 9:25, the most boring book ever. So what do? They wrote in the book, this is what Mordechai did. But it got buried. Totally got buried. They weren't a big fan of Mordechai. They totally got buried. Oh, the king can't sleep one night. So what happens? He says, bring me the Book of Chronicles. Maybe if you read that to me, I'll fall asleep. So what do they come up to? They come up to the page about what happened to Mordechai. right? So they're busy erasing. The king can't see. They're busy erasing. What does the Gemara say? The angels are busy writing. So they're trying to stall. The king says, read it. Just read it. And they read what Mordecai did. So then he says, well, has he ever been repaid? Did anyone do anything for him because he saved my life? No. And at that point, Haman walks in. Right? Now, what did Zeresh tell him? When you go to the king, the first thing you're going to do when you open your mouth is say all these terrible things against Mordecai. That's the first thing you're going to do. That's what you have to do. So as he's about to open his mouth, the king says, what would you do, if you wanted to honor someone? Now, he's not thinking, right? He should be sitting there cursing Mordecai, interrupted the king. He didn't do that. He heard honor, ego, Amalek, Haman. That's it. He lost himself. Totally lost himself. And that was the beginning and the end. Because then he had to take out Mordecai and all these other things happened. And then he got brought back to the king and that was it. But you look at that event, seemingly insignificant. Okay, Mordecai saved the king's life. Okay. They wrote in the Book of Chronicles. Okay. Seems insignificant. But that's going to be very significant because Haman's not going to be able to open up his big mouth. Because all he's going to do is curse out Mordecai. And when he curses out Mordecai, that's going to be his downfall. And Abraham says, God says, no, not going to allow that. So how are you going to get to Haman? Ego. Or as we say here in Israel, ego. Going to get to his ego. Going to get, he had power, he had fame, he had money. He had all these things. Honor, he went ballistic. He lost himself. Totally lost himself. And that was the beginning of the end. Right? So now we know the story. We know the parts of the story. But when you look at the parts, you connect the dots, that's an unbelievable story. And not only that, God's name's not mentioned explicitly. Only book, not mentioned explicitly. God's name. But you see that all these things are not by coincidence. They're totally not by coincidence. Each one is significant in and of itself. And each event is important. And each event is going to be significant for what? It's going to be significant for the event itself. For what else is going on. But most people reading this, what are they going to say? They're going to say this is insignificant. I remember when I was in university, someone raised their hand before midterm and said, do I have to know this for the test? I'm like, what are you kidding? People ask that in like 5th grade. But is this significant? Of course it's significant. Each thing is significant, but we don't see how it works until it's put together. And then when it's put together, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different thing. Right? So what we see, people love to try and say, well, based on this and based on my knowledge and based on, things I've seen, this is going to happen or that's going to happen. You get all these, experts, all these so-called experts. They'll give the spin on this, they'll give the spin on that, what they think is going to be, what people were saying about Corona, knew nothing. These doctors, nothing, one little microbe, turned over the world. You know anything here? Giving the spin on this, give the spin on that. This will help, that'll help, the other thing will help. It's ironic. We were the guinea pigs first, taking the vaccine, whatever you want to say about the vaccine, and it's ironic that so many people to take it, you would think the numbers go way down. At a certain point they did, and they spiked tremendously. Simple explanation, say, well, it depends when you got the vaccine. If you got it 6 months ago, it doesn't have its power anymore. Its power is much less, or whatever. But the idea is, if people are taking precautions, you got, so many people taking it. Again, doesn't matter. What a person wants to say about it, you hold by it, you don't hold by it. In general, if it's supposed to work at that level, then the numbers have gone way down. They never should have spiked again. Different variants, different this, different that. It works 70%. Even if it works 70%, shouldn't have had those numbers. People say the numbers are inflated. Could be. But even if they're inflated, so many people dying, you want to tell me they're inflated, it's still a significant number, right? Whatever it is. But the point is, not going to get lost in my parable here. The point is the person has to think what's going on here, right? What in the world's going on? What do we see? We don't know what we see. And a lot of times we can't understand what we see right in front of our face. During World War II, give that as an example. Many rabbis said, you don't have to leave. It's because he's coming to power or whatever. No big deal. Nothing bad's going to happen. By the time they figured out what was going on, it was too late. Borders already sealed. What happened? So what happened to some of these great rabbis, divine inspiration? Why didn't God save them over? Because it was a decree. God made a decree. Tens of thousands of millions of Jews, God forbid, going to get killed, massacred, gassed, burned, whatever, shot, whatever it is. It's a decree. It's a divine decree. So, was there any way to overcome this divine decree? And the answer is no. God didn't allow it to be overcome. By the story of Purim, there was a way to overcome it. Because it's brought down that the decree, Elionavi, go see the decree, and it was written on parchment, whatever that means. It wasn't written in blood. So the Avos, Avraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, told him, if it's written on parchment, not written in blood, there's still a chance. And you got to find someone down in this world in order that's going to be able to save the Jewish people. But what would have happened if it was written in blood? Be written in blood, you can't overcome it. One of the rabbis goes up to heaven before the destruction of the temple. And he pleads in front of the heavenly court, let me say one ineffable name of God, and let me stop the destruction. And what did they say? No, can't do it. Can't do it. It's a decree. It's going to happen, and that's it. Throw him back to his body, and that was it. So there are decrees that can be overturned. Through a lot of prayer, through a lot of Torah learning, they can be overturned. And the decrees that can't. Sometimes the decree is made, it can't be overturned. No matter what happens, it can't be overturned. Again, when, where, what, how, we don't know. There's a decree, right? Just we'll go back to Ukraine and Russia. There's a decree they were going to fight. That Putin was going to go in. All right, this is a decree that's made, right? So you're going to say, fine, let them kill each other. Doesn't matter, right? They have a lot of Jewish blood on their hands. Ukrainians, the Russians, all of them. So let them kill each other. Who cares? What's the problem? There are 400,000 Jews stuck there. That's the problem, right? So, if they get out, and a lot, hopefully a lot of them got out, right? But if they get out, very good. So let them kill each other. Who cares? They're, oh, come on, it's terrible. They have it coming. Both sides have it coming, right? I'm not going to go through horrific details what they've done, to Jews, horrific torture, murder, rape, all kinds of things. All kinds of things. Ukrainians, not choir boys, not by any stretch. Make no mistake. They have it coming. The Russians, they have it coming. The problem is the Jews are stuck. They're stuck in the middle. Totally stuck in the middle. Right? That's unfortunate. That totally is unfortunate. Right? So again, hopefully, we pray, we try and help them as much as we can. Certainly get them out. But, this happens now. Why? Why specifically now? Could be to speed up the process of coming to the Messiah. Very well could be. It could be for any number of reasons. Right? But again, God does not let anything go unpunished. And there's going to be a lot of payback. Europe, going to be a lot of payback when the Messiah comes. One of the great Kabbalists today holds in the war of Gog and Magog, whenever that's supposed to be. Who's going to get hit first? He claims Europe's going to get hit because of all the blood in Europe. The Malbim in Zechariah chapter 14 says all the lands closest to Israel are going to get hit first. Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, Jordan, all these places, all these Arab places, they're all going to get knocked off. Right? Now, do we know what's going to be? No, nobody knows. Right? But make no mistake. Make no mistake. Edom, the Western world, they're in big trouble. Muslims, they're also in big trouble. Right? But we saw, I think last week, I mentioned it last week, that a lot of things happened because of the sins of what happened with Edom. Tell me, Esav ate Yaakov. And look what Yaakov did, stole the blessing, quote unquote. Look what happened. A lot of things in the future of what Esav was, became, i.e. Edom, the Western world, they did all these things to cause Jews to go astray. Theater, Renaissance, all kinds of things, idolatry, immorality, that made Jews go astray. But someone's going to say, don't Jews have free will? Of course they have free will. We have free will. So we're going to pay the price also, right? But what happened over here? What caused them? What caused them to go astray, right? So it says, we mentioned, it's brought down that it says, guess what? It's the sins of Edom, sins of Esav. What do you mean Esav? What do you do over here? Poor Esav. Poor Uncle Esav. What do you do over here? Who his progeny became. It's his offshoots, who he was. And look what they did. Forget about murder and all kinds of things they did to the Jews. That's a whole nother issue. But the fact that they got Jews to go off and to go against their own religion, to go against God. Jews are responsible. Jews are 100% responsible. Somebody asked, just throw this out there because somebody asked it. Somebody asked about free choice, right? They asked about free choice, saying that how much of our lives do we believe we can manage and change? How much is it pre-mapped out? Right? In other words, classic case of free choice, right? Classic case of free choice. So if that's true, how much free choice is there? So Numerical and Derech Hashem, and the way of God says, free choice is limited, right? Why is it limited? Why is it limited? Now, we make good choices, we make bad choices. Sometimes the choice we make is based on whatever we think. Maybe we think it's a good thing to do, whatever the case is, and we'll be held responsible. Right? I think that the Ramban in the book of Job, that the Ramban says that, people are going to complain and say, God, why'd you do this? Why'd you do that? God said, I didn't do that. I just didn't stop you. You did this. You went down this path. It's your choice. Right? We're very quick to say, oh, God should have stopped me. What does the Gemara say? The Gemara Yuma said, you want to go in the right direction? God will help you. You want to go in the wrong direction? God doesn't have to stop you. He doesn't have an obligation to stop you. Maybe he will in some ways, but people are going to say, as the Ramban explains, people are going to say, God, your fault. Look what you did over here. Well, you're holding me responsible? Why are you holding me responsible? You're the one caused it. God, I didn't tell you to do this. I didn't tell you to go down this path. Didn't you remember? Didn't you ever hear Copin 614th commandment? Don't be stupid. I didn't tell you to do that. You chose. You wanted to see how fast, your car would go in a certain road with a hairpin turn, and you got to go, 80, 90 miles an hour, 130 kilometers an hour. You go as fast as you can, try and make that hairpin turn. What happened? You flipped over, and all these, car flipped over, it broke every bone in your body, barely alive. God said, well, how come you didn't stop me? What do you mean? God said, I didn't tell you to do that. I didn't tell you to put your life in danger. Who says I had to stop you? It could be certain things, maybe. A person has certain merit, God's going to say, okay, I'll stop it over here. I won't allow it to happen. Right? But if something happens like that, you're not blaming God over here. It's not God's fault. You did it. You were careless. Now, I would agree. Maybe certain circumstances, God will stop it. Maybe. Maybe. But, I'll give the example which I always give. A football player sees people drowning, jumps in. I think one died, he himself died. I think one of them got saved, but he didn't know how to swim. You can't jump in and put your life in danger if you don't know how to swim. That's foolish. I understand. Someone's drowning, you got to do something. But if, when I was 15 years old, I took a class in junior life saving when I was at camp. Fine, you jump in, you have to know how to save someone. If not, they will drown you. Clear as day, they will drown you if you don't know what you're doing. It's a heroic act. Person wants to try and save someone's life, etc. Okay, but you're putting your life in danger. Who says you're allowed to put your life in danger? Your person runs into to a fiery building, and the building explodes and they die. People say, well, it was a good try. The person will be absolutely heroic and this and that. No one should ever be put in certain situations. But God can say, person can have a claim, God, why didn't you save me? God, well, if I was playing God and I put on my funny George Burns glasses, my funny mustache, what would I say? Cobbin would say, if I was playing God, why in the world did you jump into a burning building? Who told you to jump into a burning building? I didn't tell you to do that. You felt the adrenaline was running, this, that. I didn't do that. That's not my fault. You're the one who did it. So it could be. So why didn't God save such a person? Why didn't God save this football player, for instance? Because maybe he didn't have enough merit. His merit got all used up. And God says, okay. I don't have to do anything over here. But sometimes a person can get saved. I'll just throw this out there also. Person can get saved. Let's say they get in a bad car accident. They come out without a scratch. Or even if they had a concussion or whatever. Something happened where, my father, bless the memory, was going out early in the morning. And there was a tractor trailer making the turn. Didn't have lights on. Right over, it's pitch black out. Went straight. He was in a huge car. Went straight underneath. Straight underneath. Came out with whatever. Bruised, this, that. He got saved. But went straight underneath the tractor trailer. Why? God didn't want him to die yet. He had some merit. He didn't want him to die. Whatever reason. I remember I was like in 5th grade, 6th grade. Why is that? One time, my father also held up gunpoint. I think, I don't know, it was before I was born. I think when I was a kid, when I was very young. Or before I was born, I remember now. Either case. So what happened? He got robbed. That was it. Nothing happened. He could have been killed. So there's something else going on. What? I have no idea. But God obviously wanted him in this world. Didn't want him to die. Until he did. Well, we don't know. But there are things that we have no explanation for. Someone get in same like in a minor accident and they have whiplash, they can't walk. They got a problem with their back for years if it ever goes away. You get someone goes in a tractor trailer underneath, and okay, they were laid up. Well, no broken bones. No broken bone, absolutely miracle. The car was smashed. If it would have been, a newer car, I mean, you're talking, whatever, 40 years ago, more. Cars were made out of something. This would have been, one of these plastic cars, forget it. It would have been crushed. Totally would have, whatever, flattened like a pancake. God forbid. So God has his cheshbon. God has his ways. He has his calculation, of how he does things. We don't understand how it's meted out. We have no idea, right? But let's call a spade a spade. Person's not allowed to put themselves in danger. And if you do, and a person died, is that suicide? I'm not going to say it's necessarily suicide, but you put yourself in a risky situation. And if you don't come out of it, you don't have anyone to blame. When you get upstairs, you're going to say, God, why didn't you save me? God's going to say, I didn't tell you to go 80 miles an hour or 100 miles an hour and take a hairpin turn and think you're going to come out of it. All kinds of crazy things happen. People die skiing. I'm not saying, it's so common. It can happen. Person gets out of control. Stories people going, however fast, straight into a tree. Or go off something and, whatever, land on their head. Who knows? I'm not saying skiing's a dangerous sport. If it's meant to be, it can be something like that. Or take someone who knows how to fly a plane. And they get vertigo. Never got vertigo before. The plane goes straight down. Happened to Kennedy, right? JFK Jr. All right, so maybe the family was cursed. That's a whole other thing. But okay, right? You know what you're doing over here. What happened? Got vertigo. It happened. But if a person knows how to fly, what are the chances of that happening? I don't know, probably not very big. The thing's obviously much more dangerous, I would think. Then you got to be a lot more careful. But so the person could ask, okay, so how far does that go? And a person goes bungee jumping. All right, bungee jumping, relatively safe, right? I mean, I wouldn't necessarily do it. Depends how high and whatever, right? Sometimes people have to feel alive when they feel like death. Go on these like crazy rides, turn you upside down, and who knows what. So a lot of times you're gonna say, okay, it's the thrill, it's this. Does anyone really think something's gonna happen? Of course not. But if it's something that potentially, that there's a lot of potential, something bad could happen, right? Something bad could happen. It's your fault, right? You're putting yourself at risk. You're obligated to guard your body, Jew or non-Jew. You're obligated to guard your body, to take care of yourself, right? A person should eat right, should exercise, all these things. You don't have to put yourself at risk, right? Now, what if someone puts themselves at risk? Let's say skydiving or whatever. Are you cashing in on your marriage? You better believe it. You're cashing in on marriage potential. In other words, let's say, here you're talking about a case where you're doing something that's reckless. It doesn't matter how safe people say it is, but it's reckless, right? If someone got in a car accident and you weren't reckless, and okay, maybe you broke a few bones, something else happened, whatever it is, it could very well be merits are taken away, right? And if someone doesn't have those merits of mitzvahs guarding them, if they don't have mitzvahs guarding them, what can happen? Splat. That's what can happen. Because you don't have it, God can say, okay, I don't need you in the world anymore. You don't have it, you're not doing anything for me. You're just taking up space. So if you're taking up space and you don't have any merits, you're not working yourself towards me, and you jump in the river to save someone, and you idiot don't know how to swim, you're going to put that on me? You got no reason to live. That's the 615th commandment. Don't be a moron. You got to be a fool to do such a thing. Again, I understand. Someone's drowning. It's adrenaline. A lot of other things going on. You're not thinking. That's the point. God wants you to think even in such a case. Even in such a case. But these people go down looking like heroes. Look what they did. Look what they sacrificed. There are cases, in the Holocaust, give an example. There was a case, who's the first people they tried to find? With a rabbi in order to kill them. And they killed also 1.5 million kids. Why? The Nazis, Yamach Shemam Zichram, may they be blotted out, may they rot wherever they are. What happened? They were methodical. They kill all the rabbis, you got no teachers. Kill all these kids, you got no one to teach. You got no one to teach and no one to then you got no Judaism. Judaism is gone. Right? They certainly understand. They understood that. So there was a case, one of the rabbis, they rounded up, they know who it was. They know who it was in this group. And someone said, okay, where's the, ex-Rebbe, whatever. And someone jumps up and says, I'm the Rebbe. But he wasn't. He saved the Rebbe's life. But at the same time, he gave up his own life. Yeah, you need big people for such a thing. Are you allowed to do such a thing? That's suicide. 100% that's suicide. You say, wow, you don't know he's going to kill me. You're pretty clear he's going to kill you. You wouldn't trust them as far as you could throw them. Give you any reason to kill you. Right? Unless they just want to, torture you or whatever. Right? But if he says, okay, I'm the Rebbe, kill me. Sorry, I'm the Rebbe, whatever. And, he dies. The whole question if he's allowed to do that. Right? The Mishnah says if they say, if the non-Jew says, hand over so-and-so, or we're going to kill everybody. Right? Again, it should never happen. But if it would happen like that, and, they say, okay, we're going to kill everybody here unless you hand over this person. What's the halacha? The halacha is everyone has to die. Can't give them over. Can't give him over. He might tell me he's a pursuer. This person's a rodev, what we call a rodev, a pursuer. It doesn't matter. Can't give him over. Not allowed to give him over. The Maharam Mirutenberg, the Rebbe of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Ash, throw out another story. The Maharam was put in jail. He was put in jail, and they wanted a tremendous amount of money to ransom him. Right? And the Mishnah in Gittin says, or the Gemara there says, you're not allowed to ransom him. Why not? You're not allowed to ransom because they're going to do this all the time. They'll take somebody and say, okay, give us X amount, or we're not going to, or we're just going to, we're going to kill him or whatever. So the Maharam said, don't do it. And the reason you don't do it is because they'll keep doing it over and over and over to the Jewish community. And what happened to Maharam? He died in jail. We'll make a more relevant example. A number of years ago, Gilad Shalit. Anyone knows who Gilad Shalit was? Right? He was a soldier, Israeli soldier taken by Hamas. And he was held for a long time. And his father recently died. But his father went on a whole thing to get his son back. So what did they do? They said, we don't talk to terrorists. We don't this. That's, quote unquote, Israeli policy. So what did they do? They eventually ransomed this soldier for like 1,000 terrorists with blood on their hands. And a lot of these terrorists that they let go, went back and did terrorist things. Now, no one should ever be in such a situation. A child's, held captive and this and that, and all that. You can't ransom him. That goes totally against halacha. You're not allowed to do that because that puts everyone in danger. Because then all they have to do is keep, all they have to do is keep taking soldiers, or whatever, and they keep doing it over and over and over again, right? Because they know you're going to give in, right? So they have a bargaining chip. They say, fine, we'll give your soldier back. He's alive. We'll give him alive. You give us 1,000 of our people that are in jail. And they weren't just, people caught shoplifting or stealing. These are people with blood on their hands. And there's a lot of pressure without getting into politics. A lot of pressure on the government to do something, to get them out. It's all over the press, all over the media. They couldn't get him. They couldn't find him. It was too risky to do it. Because they kept moving from place to place and booby trapping all the places. Would have been a bloodbath to find him. So they didn't go in. They tried intelligence, whatever. It was too risky. Seemingly too risky. But what happened? They exchanged 1,000 people for him. 1,000! 1,000 terrorists, blood on their hands. Boggles the mind. Absolutely boggles the mind. Again, come on, don't you have a heart? I'm not saying I don't have a heart. I'm not saying, imagine what his family went through. Can't imagine. Anyone's a parent or even just thinks about what that means. It's horrific. Nobody's saying not. But you see, there are rules over here. And if you allow this to happen, they'll do it again. And they'll do it again. Right? They'll held people captive and they'll suck you dry. They'll suck the community dry. And they'll keep trying to do this. That's why you don't do it. And the Maharam ended up dying in jail. Because he said, don't you ever, try and ransom me. Forget it. Whatever happens to me happens. But, there are rules here. There are halachas governing this. Extreme sports are highly problematic. Because, what's it going to cause? It cause a person, it can put someone's life in danger. Right? There's no question, I spoke about this on Tanakh Talk also. What about boxing? Person allowed to be a boxer. Let's say they're very good. Whatever. But don't you know, every time you get hit in the head, I don't know, anything different than boxing's worse. Right? Say a person's a professional football player. And we know over the years what's happened. You get enough concussions, hitting the head, at 80 miles an hour, different thing, throws the body off, causes a lot of problems. They're finding out now. You have all these ex-football players, just committing suicide because of the pain and and all that. But if you were to ask, someone even in Pop Warner, right? You would ask somebody, well, that's what they call it where I grew up, Pee Wee League, whatever, 7 years old, 8 years old, whatever, and they tell them, if you continue to play, this could happen, that could happen. But if someone's like, a promising player, I would venture to say most people are going to say it doesn't matter. I'm here for now. I'm going to enjoy it now. What happens, 50 years later, 40 years after, I'm not worried. I'll deal with it then. All right. Again, a big mistake. And that's one of the more dangerous sports. For sure. Doesn't matter all the padding, whatever. You just get knocked on the head so many times. Of course it's going to give you brain damage. Right? You get a lot of players like that. And the NFL doesn't want to cover that, whatever. It's the whole thing. That's the whole thing. But again, you tell someone who's very good at it, and you tell them, listen, this could be the repercussions. You could absolutely be it cause you brain damage and other things. Not to mention broken bones, and other things. So people still say it's worth the risk. Guarantee a lot of people. I don't, how many people are, going to veer off not playing it? Probably few. I haven't done a study on it. You can take what I say with a grain of salt, but I can't imagine if someone's good or potentially, they could be good. Why would they stop? Unless something happens or blow out their knees, something else. But it's not just the fun of the game. They might love the game, but it's, even if it's a small percentage, will make it to college and end up in the pros. Whatever, even if it's a very small percentage, but if someone's got a chance, of course he's going to take it. Why wouldn't he take it? Other sports are easier, right? Less wear and tear in certain ways. Tell me, playing basketball, probably blow out your knee, break your leg, your ankle, whatever. A lot of things can happen too, but it's not the same. This is a real contact. Someone can get fouled and, get crunched and this and that, but it's very rare. It's definitely very rare. So, there was a story many years ago, dating myself, I think it was in the 70s. There's a player, I think, for the Celtics that punched somebody, like broke his face. Basically broke his face, broke his jaw, whatever. And that person was never the same afterwards. Never. Right? Now, can that happen? Can happen. There's a baseball player that, got beamed on the head, got hit on the head. That was it. Career was over. These things can happen, right? But is it probable? Is it probable? I don't know if it's probable, right? In most sports, it's not so probable. When it comes to, football or boxing, yeah. What happened to Muhammad Ali? So many punches to the head, destroyed him. But again, if he'd come back and say it was all worth it, of course he'd say it's worth it. I don't think there's any question. Somebody here asked, take some questions sort of in the middle here, but got totally off topic. Are any of the original vestments preserved? Some of them probably buried somewhere. Probably buried somewhere here, or like the vessels. The vessels, some are probably here buried in Israel. One person generation, usually knows where they are, and he passed that on before they pass on. And a lot of them probably in the Vatican, because the Gemara states clear that's what Titus did. He took a lot of the vessels. A lot of the temple vessels took them to the Vatican, right? Took them to Rome, which means the Vatican. Third one, barrel wine should be well, one say. They say, oh, we don't know anything about it. We don't have them, etc. But he said, there's so many rooms in the Vatican. Imagine what you do in it. Imagine if you do a little bit of spring cleaning. You do a little bit of spring cleaning, you never know what you're going to find, right? So a lot of the vessels are probably there. That definitely probably there as well. So I would say that, yeah, they're probably buried somewhere, somewhere here in Israel. Let me take some other questions here. Is there a recommended haircut for a Noahide man? No. Right? There is a question by by a Jew. Can they cut off their their sidewalks or whatever? And that you're not allowed to. You're allowed to leave, a little bit. You're not allowed to cut it right from here, from the jawbone and over here. Some people have these Elvis sideburns, so to speak, and maybe they're clean shaven on here, but anyone who cuts, from, let's say, a Jew cuts from the jawbone on either side, that's forbidden, right? Meaning you cut it all the way down to the to the root. I remember once saw a commercial for what do they call it, for an electric razor, right? And this electric razor, I think it was Remington, right? That they said, get under the root and pull it up. Well, that's forbidden. That 100% is forbidden. You're not allowed to cut it from the root, right? Even if it's a scissors motion, right? A razor, 100% forbidden, right? Because that cuts it to the root. Now, if you do it by scissors, normally that's not going to be the case. Because the scissors action, even by an electric, a scissors action is not going to get it to the root. It'll get close, but it won't get it to the root. There are some electric razors that get absolutely to the root. That's forbidden. You have to know which ones or whatever, but in general, using a razor be forbidden. All right, doesn't apply to a non-Jew. The non-Jew, get any haircut they want. Right? They want to get a mohawk, not a problem. Right? They want to get, a design, who knows what, not a problem. They don't have an issue with pace, right? Or side curls or side locks, whatever you want to call them. It's only by Jews, right? It's only by Jews. Someone else can use electric razor, 3 circular blades. Even if it's very smooth, the question is how far does it go, right? So there are rabbinical authorities that you shouldn't touch any of them. You're allowed to use something that takes it off, but you're not allowed to use, you take nair. I don't know, that'd be kind of painful. But, let's say you take nair. I don't even know if nair still exists, right? That would burn it off. Burn it off, you're allowed to, right? When is it forbidden to use a razor or anything similar to a razor? So scissors would be permissible because it's not like a razor. It's not going to get that close. It'll get close, but not that close. So even if it's very smooth, but it doesn't, again, you have to know if it gets to the root. There are circular blades that can, again, I saw this commercial years ago for Remington, that they claim, and if it's true, then it would be forbidden. They claim if they get so close, it takes the root from underneath and pulls it up. That's forbidden. Now, if you tell me there's a circular blade that does not do that, but gets very close, that would be okay. You have to know, which one does what, but there are rabbinical authorities that should never use, anything like that. You should use something else to take the hair off, but not something like that. Even if it takes it all off, doesn't matter, right? I mean, not here, but if it would take hair off, and it would take it, in a way where it's going to just like burn it off or something like that. So that's something else, right? That would be something else. But again, what's forbidden? Forbidden is a razor or anything similar to a razor. Scissors should be okay unless it gets very close. Then if it gets very close and it pulls out from the root, that's the status of a razor. And that would be forbidden. Could a Jew use a laser? Yeah, you could have it. If it wouldn't, problem with laser, we'll get actually it's an interesting question, because what about someone who's hemophiliac? What about doing circumcision? You do circumcision on someone who's a hemophiliac. What it means that if they bleed, they can't stop the bleeding, or it's very hard to stop the bleeding. So someone who's a hemophiliac wants to do laser. You can do laser in theory. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach has a whole response about it, and he says, "What's the problem?" The Rambam says you need something that cuts. Here we're talking about circumcision. We're not talking about cutting the hair. I'm just pointing this out. By circumcision, you need something that cuts. Laser doesn't cut; it burns. So if the whole mitzvah by circumcision is you have to cut that foreskin, you can't burn it. Certainly can't burn it, right? But the problem with laser also, even if you're just taking off hair, the problem is, what if it leaves a mark, leaves makes a wound, let's say, right? So if it would make a wound, you're not allowed to do that. It wouldn't be allowed to do that. So the question, let's say in this case by circumcision, if it would make a wound, they got another issue, but there's no other way to do it, right? If it's a guy, he has to have it done. So there's no other way to do it. So it could be after the fact, did it that way. Right? According to some, maybe it's okay. Maybe since there's no other way to do it. Right? But Shmuel Zalman Auerbach, blessed memory, says, if you do it in a way where you don't cut, you can't do it. So according to him, maybe you'd say you can't do it. Just can't, it can't be done. No other way to do it. You're right. You took it off. You just didn't take it off the right way. Right? And someone, just throw this out there also, someone who already had circumcision before they converted. Right? So you can't take it off, something else to take off. So you take so you'd have to draw blood. They would have to draw blood, and then, because there's nothing else to do. It's called hatafas dam. Hatafas dam bris. They make, they make a little prick, and they take some blood, and that's it. You go to the mikvah straight away. Make sure it stops bleeding, and that won't be a problem. But in that case, nothing else to do. So people have asked, well, what do I do? I'm in the process of conversion. Should I have it done now? No, you wait till right before conversion. And then you do it right, and all things being equal, fine. If it's already been done, then okay, it's nothing to do. Then there's nothing to do. Someone asked, laser burn. So even if laser burns, right? So if we're taking off the hair, that still might be all right. Why? Because what's the prohibition? Prohibition is using a knife. Anything similar to a knife. So nair, we said, should be okay. Even if it takes it off from the root, you're not taking it off the same way. That's a little bit of a technicality, right? Because if you take it off like a razor, that's forbidden. This is not doing the same thing. It ain't. You'll tell me it takes off from the root. You're right, but it's not doing it like a razor. It's not doing it like a razor. That's the prohibition. If it's and if scissors do it like razor, then that's forbidden. Then that would be forbidden. But if you do it through laser, you might be over prohibition of making a wound in your body, but yeah, you will take it off. 100% you'll take it off. The laser, if I wouldn't have the problem, let's say making a wound, if it wouldn't make a wound, you could do it that way. That should be okay. Someone asked, prohibition of wasting seed, does it apply to all of Israel? Well, who else should it apply to? The only other person it should apply to is the only question would be by non-Jews. Does it apply to non-Jews? So I could say very simply, the sons of Judah died by spilling seed. Sons of Judah weren't Jewish, not as far as I know. Unless you tell me they kept the Torah before it was given, right? But as far as I know, they weren't Jewish, right? So many say by non-Jews it's forbidden. It's also forbidden, right? But for sure it applies to all Jews. Right? I mean, I'm not sure the question. You can repeat the question if you want. Well, what's the question of all of Israel? Meaning who? It apply to a Kohen, apply to a Levite, apply to, Yisrael. Yeah. Would it apply to a woman? Oh, that's a good question. Right? So that should be forbidden for a woman also. Why is that everybody? Right? It might be a rabbinic prohibition. For a guy, it might be a Torah prohibition. Right? But, it should be, let's say better. For a woman, it might be a different issue. Here it's not called wasting seed by her, right? So if she does that, we'll keep this clean, right? If she does that, that might come under a different prohibition, but not this. But it should apply to non-Jews also. Someone asked, the Messiah, does he know he's the Messiah? Yeah. There's a spark of the Messiah in every generation. So the person will know if he's the Messiah or not. They for sure will know. Now, if that person dies and the Messiah hasn't come, so that spark will go to someone else in that generation or next generation, whatever it is. But that person for sure is going to know. They are definitely going to know. Let me see. All right, let's go a little bit further. Let me finish up this Rebbeinu B'chai. Got totally off topic here. So we mentioned there is a Beis Din Shalmala and a Beis Din Shalmata. Beis Din Shalmata is the Beis Hamikdash is the temple in this world. Now we don't have a temple today, but again, we're talking about wearing the vestments, Kohen wearing the vestments. and it corresponds to the heavenly temple upstairs. And that we see in the Medrash. Now the Rebbe Bachai here brings down a Medrash. And he says, just like what we do down here, we have the ketones that's made out of linen, etc. So too upstairs. And he says, interesting, the clothing of the linen, the Gemara says, is the angel Michael. He says, Michael, I have a footnote here. It says it's really Gabriel. It's really the angel of Gabriel wearing this. Right? Hard to explain what it means. An angel is really wearing this vestment upstairs. If an angel is just a spiritual being, with no body, I don't know. Go figure. He brings down this medrash, and he says that the Kohen himself, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, he says not fitting to enter the Holy of Holies. Why? Because it says it's a Beis HaRachamim. It's the house of compassion. Why does it call the house of compassion? So the temple is called the house of compassion because it atones, brings sacrifices. There's atonement. And what brings the atonement over here? The linen vestments. That's what brings atonement. So he says now, it's pretty wild, but he says, if you understand this word bad, which means linen, right? He says there are a lot of very unbelievable intention over here. Unbelievable intention. What does he mean? First of all, he says that, what is it a hint to? It's a hint to humility. It's a hint to God's uniqueness, God's oneness in the world. It's a hint over here also to atonement. Now, how does he get all this? Where does he get it from? So he says it's a hint. It's a hint to humility. Why? Because bad itself, this linen, is even greater than animals. Meaning, what does it come? It comes from the ground. It comes from the ground. Right? And that's why I use the language that it's linen and it's got branches. Right? It's got branches. So he says, one thing is, sorry, I skipped something there, 1 second. He says linen grows from the ground, grows from the dirt. Right? And that should make us more humble. Right? It should make the Kohen more humble when he's serving, to remember he himself came from the dirt. Right? Wasn't man created from the dust of the four corners of the earth? Right? It comes from the earth. It should be humble from that. So that's why it's better than wool. Why? Because he says by wool comes from animals, not from the dirt. It comes from animals. That's why it says, as the Talmud tells us, that something grows from the ground, right? We see linen grows from the ground. That's one thing. That's why linen is compared to, or as a hint to humility. Because it comes from the ground. The Kohen will remember, the high priest will remember, he also came from the ground. Right? Mankind came from the ground. Second thing is, it's a hint, again, not simple explanation, obviously, but it's a hint. It's a hint of Yichud. What is Yichud? God's oneness, God's uniqueness in the world. Why? He says that the string of linen itself is unique and it doesn't split. Wool, he says, splits. take his word for it, right? Wool itself can split. He says canvas doesn't. Sorry, linen doesn't. That's why it's unique. Also, by hair in a person, right? Also doesn't split. It's interesting. It says splitting hairs, right? But if you take a piece of hair, try and split it, right? Hair doesn't split. That, in any case, it's unique, and it's similar, and that's a sign of its uniqueness. And linen is also white. And it's also, what does white represent? Atonement. Represents atonement. Says Rabbeinu Bachai further. What is the numeric value of Bad? That's also a mind-boggling thing. The numerical value, right? Every Hebrew letter has a number, right? Aleph is 1, Beis is 2. You take the word Bad, Beis Dalet. Beis is 2, Dalet is 4, 6, right? So he says the numerical value of Bad, of linen, is 6. So that's why linen many times is called Sheish. Right? Torah calls it Sheish. Why does it call it Sheish? 6. That's its numerical value. So he says, also, the cherubs, the keruvim that are in the Holy of Holies, standing on top of the ark. These short little fat kids, I would call them, right? They're kids with wings, right? Cherubs, as they're called, or in Hebrew, keruvim. That in the Holy of Holies, it's also a hint over here that also he says that it also corresponds in some way also to 6. The cherubs also are included in this. So then he says like this. This is really what I want to get to. He says that all the things above in the world correspond here as well. And that's why the Kohen makes the blessing. When he makes the blessing in the Holy of Holies, he has the power, and a blessing has the power to have influence above and influence in this world. I'm going to say, okay, sounds like a little bit of spiritual mumbo jumbo here. What does that mean? Give an example. Person makes a blessing. Let's say they make a blessing on an apple. We use an apple as an example. You make a blessing on an apple. A Jew makes a blessing on an apple. So what happens? You make a blessing on the apple, and that has an effect. First of all, you're satisfying hunger. You're recognizing God's king of the world, right? You mentioned God being king of the world. Mention his name. And it has spiritual influence also for all fruit-bearing trees. Whether we see it, we don't see it, doesn't matter. Right? It's got that spiritual influence. Now, someone's going to say, come on, all I'm doing is eating an apple. You're right, but when a person does an action in this world, it goes up, the Ramchal says in Derech Hashem, in the way of God, it goes up. God looks at it, judges it, smacks it down. Back in this world, has a physical, spiritual ramification. The person that say, I ate an apple, I didn't do anything else. Right? Spiritually has an effect. If a person, we'll give 2 examples. Give 2 examples, physical and spiritual effect. Physical effect, woman's pregnant, she smokes crack, her kid comes out deformed. Is it the kid's fault? No. Is there a reality this can happen? Yes. So there are physical ramifications for what I do. There are also spiritual ramifications. If a woman has relations with someone she's not allowed to be with, doesn't necessarily mean out of wedlock. Right? She's with somebody she's not allowed to be with, she has a child. That child is called a mamzer. Now, normally translated as a bastard child, but it means a child that she shouldn't have had. Someone she's not allowed to be with doesn't mean it's out of wedlock, per se. It's just she's with somebody she's not allowed to be with. Now, that child, who's that child allowed to marry? That child's only allowed to marry someone in the same union or a convert, because that soul of that child now is blemished. So can't marry a Jew. But a convert, did everything to change, become a Jew. You're right, but they were born as a non-Jew. If they were born as a non-Jew, then even if they convert, there's still something there, right? They don't have the pedigree. They don't have the same pedigree, as a Jew in different ways. There's limitation in different ways. But with that said, the moms or that child who anything deserve such a thing? No, God didn't stop it. So he allowed that child to be born. So there's spiritual repercussions. Spiritual repercussions. So a person can do something and it can go two ways at the same time. There can be a physical repercussion. There can be a spiritual repercussion. Right? So here he's saying that when the Kohen makes that blessing, it's got the power to have an effect above and below. In other words, this blessing has the effect for God to atone for the Jewish people. And it has an effect in this world also. Right? And that is even this Kohen, this high priest, who's specifically doing this service. Right? It's only the high priest who can go into the Holy of Holies. So then it says, what about the pants made out of linen? Pants made out of linen, Torah over here says, it goes on his flesh, on his loins, so to speak. From his flesh and below, right? From his loins and below, from his hip down, which is the part that he should be most humble by. Right? It corresponds, right, to this lower world that we're in. So then he says, okay, now it's corresponding to different spiritual worlds. Okay, we're not necessarily going to get into that. But he wants to point out that all these things have a correspondence to the upper world and have an effect. And absolutely have an effect. So it's not just what goes on in this world. A person thinks, it doesn't matter, this, that. There are spiritual repercussions. 100% there are spiritual repercussions in this world. Right? So someone asks, to be clear, moms is only of a Jewish woman. Yeah, it doesn't apply to a non-Jew. No spiritual cooties by a non-Jew. My language. Only applies to a Jew. A non-Jew, if they have a child, let's say, they commit adultery. Well, they're liable for death penalty on that. Right? That comes under the no-hide laws of immorality. They're not allowed to be with whoever they want. There are certain prohibitions of who they're allowed to be with and who not. Right? But having, be with somebody they're not allowed to be with, that child is, it might be a forbidden union, certainly for them. Child has no status. It doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to them. They'll be liable for death penalty, though. Right? It doesn't matter, status of the child. The person will be liable for death penalty because it's with somebody who's not allowed to be. It's a forbidden union. Right? But again, let's just make clear, that status of the child is nothing. There's no problem. And even if it would be of a Jewish woman, even if it would be a Jewish woman, if this Jewish woman didn't have a proper marriage to another Jew, forget to marry to a non-Jew, different issue, right? But let's say she was married to a Jew and she's with someone else not allowed to be with. So if that was the case, who said she had a proper wedding? Who says there were Jewish witnesses that kept Shabbos? So it's not. So according to the Torah, it's not really a marriage. Because someone who gets married, two Jews, they got a man and a woman, got to make this pretty clear. Man and a woman who get married, right? So you have Kedushin and Nisuin. What is Kedushin? Do it at the same time. Right, Rabbi, get up, make a blessing, and say that both of you are consecrated to each other. In other words, if you're with somebody else, that's forbidden. Consecrated to each other. And then you have the actual marriage, giving over the ring, breaking of the glass, and you have all the 7 blessings and all that. Now, let's say the vast majority of secular Jews, right, if they would go through this ceremony, they would go through a Jewish ceremony. You need proper witnesses. Sign on the marriage document, the ketubah, and you need witnesses to see, it'll be the same witnesses, to see the man give the ring. And then when they're alone together, they're alone for the first time, they have to watch the door, make sure no one goes in for 5 minutes, 7 minutes, something like that. Most secular Jews don't have this. Not all of them don't have this. So if that's the case, according to the Torah, it's not a valid marriage. It's not a real marriage. Doesn't mean they're not, according to secular law, they might be married. Fine. Right? But according to the Torah, it's not a real marriage. So if it's not a real marriage, and there was something they're not supposed to be, that might be forbidden, right? But over here, we're not talking about a mums. Right? That'd be a different issue. Right? Because they don't have a status of really being married. Right? So if they don't have the status of being married, you can't have this situation. So Moshe Feinstein, a blessed memory, basically fixed 99% of the problems. Right? By secular Jews, you won't have this issue. You 100% won't have this issue. There are some times you can't get away with it. You can't get around it. Right? So anyone of mixed ancestry is not a mamzer. No. Mixed ancestry doesn't matter. That's not going to matter. There are different issues, but that's not the issue. That's not the issue here. I'll tell you a sad story. There's a woman who was married, and she ended up, her husband left. Her husband disappeared. She didn't know where her husband went. No idea. So what happened? After a certain amount of time, the rabbinical court gave her permission to remarry. So she remarries, has a whole bunch of kids. They're all religious. 25 years later, the ex-husband shows up. So I don't know, what criteria the rabbinical court allowed to remarry, whatever the case is. 25 years later, this ex-husband shows up. Now there's a problem. There's a major problem. All these marriages have to be uprooted. Our kids are mamzerim. Kosher witnesses, the whole 9 yards. Right? So this woman comes to my Rebbe and asks him what to do. Rebbe tells me this story many years ago. Tells me this story. So I asked him, how in the world are you going to find permissibility over here? It's a clear case of mamzer. He goes, I'm still looking. I said, okay. Asked him a few weeks later what happened. He said, I couldn't find permissibility. I sent the question to Rebbe Eliashu, a blessed memory. I don't know what happened in the end with that. But he said, I don't want to uproot, all these marriages. According to him, it came out that there's nothing to do. Basin made a big mistake. Huge mistake. And they're certainly liable for the mistake, but the reality is there's a major problem here. All the kids have to get divorced. They're all religious. Right? It's a horrific thing. Horrific. But, as we always say, you cannot turn the Torah into a pretzel. If you can find a way, if there's a permissibility, it's one thing. If there's no permissibility, this is tragic. It's tragic. A serious mistake is made. It can happen. It can happen. So if it's mixed ancestry, that's not an issue. That's not an issue. If, again, we're talking about two Jews, doesn't apply to a non-Jew. Right? Even if it's a Jewish woman, she's not allowed to be with a non-Jew. Fine. right? But if that's the case, and they have a child, the child's not. All right, I'll say like this: the Talmud states clear that if the woman is Jewish, and the husband is not, the kid is Jewish. That's how it comes out. But there are a bunch of different opinions that the Talmud says. One opinion is that child is called blemished. Second opinion is that child's called the mom's. Right? It's forbidden union. Right? A little bit outside definition over here, but forbidden union. We hold, as a matter of fact, we hold that a child from such a union is considered Jewish. Now, there are later commentaries that say, in such a case where that child is really blemished, if they would come in front of a rabbinical court, tell them this is what happened, the rabbinical court would say, okay, you should do a conversion, go to the mikveh, and take that blemish off. I asked my Rebbe once about this. He said they had a case, a few times like that. And they told them exactly that. There are later rabbinical authorities saying, you want to get rid of that blemish, you should go in front of a rabbinical court for a proper conversion, so to speak, to take that spiritual blemish off. You go to the mikveh, you take care of it. Now, does the person have an obligation to do it? No. It's good. I would think it's a good thing to do. Right? But later commentaries say, yeah, it should be done. Obligation? No. More like, very good advice. So I hear people say sometimes, well, if the mother's Jewish, well, that's all that matters. A very shallow way of looking at it. That's the bottom line. It's true. 100%, that's the bottom line. But guess what? There are other things going on. There are other things going on over here. The Talmud calls the person blemished. Talmud calls him a mamzer. Oh, but the kid's Jewish. Technically, the kid is Jewish. But it's got a major blemish on their soul. Now, listen, if they learn a lot of Torah and they work on themselves, whatever, but yeah, they should get rid of this if possible. Someone asks, is it recommended for Noahites to pray to get rich? I would say pray that you should have money. You should be able to pay your bills. Everyone wants to have plenty of money, but I would say plenty of money brings problems. The Gemara says in Brachos that a person in this world does not normally inherit both worlds, meaning that a person is not necessarily going to be a great rabbinic scholar while at the same time having money. The two don't mix. I'm not saying a person should strive for poverty. I'm not saying that. But usually money and Torah don't mix. In other words, the vast majority of rabbinical scholars out there today, they don't have a lot of money. And money causes other problems. But I would say that a person should pray that God should take care of their needs. Right? I know someone asked a question to Rabbi once, should I work extra hard and many more hours so I can give more to charity? He said, no. You give what you can give and spend the other time learning Torah. But the praise should be rich. I'll tell you statistically, anyone who's ever won the lottery, won tens of millions of dollars, never ended well. Across the board, never ended well. Family fights, they end up with nothing left. Many of them. Right? So, I saw brought down somewhere that, I don't remember where, that 1 in 1,000 rich people go to Gan Eden, go to paradise. 1 in 1,000. Because they don't, they waste time, they don't learn, spend money on all kinds of different things, and they lose their portion of the world to come. And they suffer tremendously because they could have used the money for good things. 1 in 1,000. People would say, well, I'd like to be at least, give me that opportunity. We pray every day, God, to take care of our needs. That's what we should pray for. I should live in luxury. The more you have, the more you want. That's what the Mishnah in Perkei Avos says. Says in ethics for our fathers. Harbi nechasim, harbi dag. the more property a person has, the more he's worried how he's going to keep it, what he's going to do with it. Right? A person has 100, he wants 200, 200, he wants 400. It never ends. So I would say better to pray, just God take care of my needs. Being rich, different issue. A non-Jewish woman committed adultery, bring the child to the world before she gets the death penalty. It's a good question. Let's say she's 4 months pregnant and she committed adultery. I don't know if they let the baby be born. I have to check that. If she transgressed, they take her out and kill her. I don't think it matters if she has a child or not. But that I'm not sure. That I have to check. Someone asked, even if she's married to a Jew and the child is from adultery. If she's married to a Jew and she's with someone else, that child's a mamzer. So if it's a forbidden relationship, that child's a mamzer. Right? Mixed ancestry from a non-Jew, it doesn't matter. There's no such thing as a mamzer from a non-Jew. It's only for a Jew. It only applies to a Jew. The question is, if a non-Jew committed adultery, right? If a non-Jew committed adultery, so if it's a forbidden relationship for a non-Jew, they're liable. They're liable for death penalty, right? For Jews, also death penalty, by the way. Right? It's also a forbidden relationship. The question is the status of the child. Status of the child to be a mamzer. The mother's going to be killed. And the person she's with is going to be killed. Right? Certainly if he's a Jew. Right? But the child still has the same status. That status doesn't change. Right? So so how does it work? The only way, let's make clear, I should have clarified this, that a child stays the status of a mamzer. Now, they can only marry a convert or someone of the same union. Now, if they marry someone of the same union, they have kids, those kids are also mamzerim. So some will say they can't marry somebody like that because they're going to bring more mamzerim into the world. That's certainly not good. So for themselves, they can't get fixed up. For their kids, possibly they could. Why? The only possible way is if they would marry a slave. If they would marry a slave, then that child's not a mamzer. And that child wouldn't be a mamzer. That's the only way to fix it up. So everyone's told me many years ago, there's only one country in the world, I don't know if it's still true today or not, but he told me there's only one country in the world that allows, to marry a slave here, or slavery in general, and that's by Saudi Arabia. He said if you took someone there, married them, and had a child, that child does not have the status of a mamzer. But that continues forever. It doesn't change. It doesn't change. Right? It seemingly goes on forever. But again, a lot of these cases today, we're talking in theory, because a lot of these cases today will never happen. The reason is Moshe Feinstein got rid of all that. He took care of that, right? By Jews, because most secular Jews don't have a real marriage. So it's really a moot point. But even if that would be the case, the person himself doesn't change the status. But if he's with the slave, that could change the status of the child. That child will no longer be a mamzer, but everyone else still has the same status. That's how it perpetuates. It keeps going on, right? But that's the problem. If mamzer marries another mamzer, so there is a problem of bringing more mamzerim to the world. That's definitely a problem, right? But that doesn't change the status. So that child's going to have to marry someone of that same status or a convert. It's a perpetual thing, and then it doesn't stop. Essentially, it doesn't stop. Unless a person would marry a slave or something like that, that would take you out of the problem. Not for you, but for the child that you would have. Then that would end the cycle. But he says there's only one place you can do it, and that's Saudi Arabia. I don't know if it's still true today. According to international law. If that's permissible according to international law, you can do it. That you can do. But otherwise the status doesn't change. It's unfortunate, but that's a spiritual reality. It doesn't change. Wow. Interesting topics here. Someone asks, what happened to the child of the two no-eyed parents that got caught in adultery? If it's a forbidden relationship, again, the child, there's nothing wrong with the child. There's no status of mamzer by a non-Jew. Right? Let's make that clear. There's no status of a mamzer. If there's no status of a mamzer by a non-Jew, so okay, they have that child. That child can marry whoever they want. They be with whoever they want. Remember also, there's no status. There's no status of marriage. A non-Jew, all they have to do is live together. That's enough to be called, married. But here we're talking about forbidden relationships. So forget about marriage or anything else. If they're with somebody they're not allowed to be with, right? It's a forbidden relationship. Brother or sister, forbidden. Right? That's forbidden. So let's say they had a child. The child came out normal. I don't know, God forbid, whatever. Right? It's brother and sister. Brother and sister together. They're both killed. Child doesn't get killed. Not that I know of. Child doesn't get killed. There's no status the moms are by that child. Nothing happens to the child. Parents end up dying, child being orphan. Okay? That's what would happen. But there's nothing wrong with the child over here. Child didn't do anything wrong. Child's not going to pay the price. Parents pay the price. Or whatever. They're not married, doesn't matter. Right? The fact that it's a forbidden relationship, that makes it forbidden. That makes it forbidden, but the child's not affected. That would be the case. Why is convert marrying moms? So if a convert, let me just remember one thing. Let me just double check something here. Let me see something here. Second. See one thing here. 1 second. Question is by a convert. I don't know if a convert I don't know if a convert changes it. 1 second, I'll got one other thing here. 1 second. There's a whole discussion here. But the Rambam says that if you have a convert marry, let's say, a mamzer or a woman or whatever, mamzeres, whatever. If one of the parents is a Jew, i.e., their mother was Jewish, then you can't marry a mamzer. You wouldn't be able to allow marry a mamzer. So whatever, the whole thing here. So I think if I remember correctly, I'll have to double check this. That if you have a mamzer, if you have a mamzer that marries a convert, I don't think that's perpetuating mamzeris. It doesn't change. In other words, their children won't necessarily be mamzer, or maybe they will. I don't know. I have to double check. I'm not sure, because it seems like the only way out of the problem is to marry, a female slave, and they have a child. That takes the status out. But I think marrying a convert, I don't think it changes the status. They're allowed to marry a convert, right? The question is having children. That's still bringing more mamzerim in. That I have to double check. I think that's the case, but I have to double check. So the question is how far it's perpetuated. If a person is allowed to marry a convert, it doesn't necessarily change the fact that their kids are mamzerim, right? As far as I remember, the only way it's going to affect the kid is if that person had relations, let's say, with a slave, female slave. She has a child. That child's not a mamzer. But even with the convert, it would be a mamzer. So then you still have the problem of bringing more mamzerim into the world. But they're allowed to marry. So it could be, according to that opinion, then they're allowed to marry, have kids, even if they are bringing more mamzerim in. It's a question of who they're allowed to marry. The question is, does it affect the status of the kid? That's the question, right? And I don't think it does. I think the fact that it just stays the same. The only way it affects the status of the kid is if that mamzer marries a slave and that slave has a child, that kid won't be a mamzer anymore. Then they can marry whoever they want. But I think even with a convert, I think it stays the same. It's just a question who can marry. That's the only question. But I have to double check that. Well, whatever, it gets in this other question. Someone asked, good question. Does the mamzer child have the commandment to be fruitful and multiply? So according to that opinion, you're not allowed to bring more mamzerim into the world. The answer would be no. Right? But, if they're allowed to marry a convert and that child still becomes a mamzer, then it could be we don't hold that. Right? Again, that's part of the same question. That whatever, I'll have to look into it. I'm not sure. My gut tells me that doesn't change. That it doesn't change the status of the kid, but you do have an issue of bringing more mamzerim into the world. I don't know if that's going to take away from the prohibition of being fruitful and multiply. That I'm not sure. There would be opinions that they shouldn't have kids, but I don't know if we hold that. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Any other questions? Boy, interesting class today. Hard to tell you, I would have thought in my mind what was going to come out. None of these things were going to come out. But okay, that's what Torah is. Yeah, any other questions? All right, I'm gonna stop here. We didn't actually finish the verse, but whatever, we'll finish that. We'll do it next week. I just every Tuesday, every Sunday, 9:00 Eastern time, 4:00 Israel time. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman. You can send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBIChaimCoffman@gmail.com.